we actually then think about how do you amplify that on social? How do you kind of get your influencers, your content creators to come down to capture that and to amplify it? But you need a really good creative line or creative hook for people to want to share that. And I think we've always tried to surprise people. So I constantly get messages in my LinkedIn and in my WhatsApp groups where people send me a chalk stencil we've done in the middle of the road or in a park somewhere, and they're kind of going, "Oh wow, Rory, like how did you get away with that?" And my answer always is, we ask for forgiveness, not permission. We just do things, and we've always just said, you know what? Let's just do it. If we get in trouble, we get in trouble, but let's get ourselves out there, get ourselves talked about, because there's nothing worse than being beige and just doing what everybody else is doing.
I'm Eric Fulweiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains, rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today.
Hey everyone, my guest today is Rory McEntee. He leads marketing at Gymbox. If you're not familiar with Gymbox, they are a very disruptive, provocative, and interesting challenger brand here in the UK. Rory is a seasoned marketing leader. He's built a career across CPG, retail, leisure industries, working with some of the biggest brands and a lot of challenger brands as well, including Paddy Power. The bulk of the conversation, as you'll see, and if you've seen any of the Gymbox marketing that has been done recently, it's about creativity, it's about disruption, it's about quote unquote going viral. And, it's just one of those brands where they've been able to do that consistently, which I know is something that everybody wants to get to. So incredibly innovative, incredibly interesting conversation. We dig into how, particularly when you have constraints around budget, you can have an outsized impact. So he's got a couple ideas and suggestions for people on that. We talk about his dynamic with his CEO and how he's been able to cultivate a relationship where, in his words, his CEO, quote, lets him get on with it. He's able to do risky and provocative things. And then we also talk about, which I think is really fascinating, just, he calls himself, he's like, I'm very, very idea-led. And he even said, like, sometimes he throws away and ignores the data, and even says, you really shouldn't listen to the customers all the time, which of course is a little bit different, and there is some nuance to it. But I think the instinct that he's cultivated and how committed he is to these ideas, and when he sees it, he knows. Not always, and he does talk about some of the misses that he's had, but I think that's a really interesting thing for people to think about. And just, at least for me, I walk away from this conversation feeling like I maybe need to push myself a little bit more, to be a little bit more uncomfortable and a little bit more aggressive with what we can do on the marketing front. So really great conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, please enjoy Rory McEntee of Gymbox. All right, Rory, really looking forward to this conversation. And it's funny, I reached out a while ago, and I actually had to go back to my old Moleskine, my previous Moleskine, to look up my notes. So I've been excited about this conversation for a few months now. How you doing?
Yeah, really good, really good. Thanks for having me on.
Cool. So we got a lot to get through, and I told you before we pressed record that I dropped into the AMP community, our WhatsApp CMO group, that I was chatting to you today, and it kicked off a lot of conversation. So I'm gonna have to report back to them. But before we get into it, can you tell us about a challenger brand that you are passionate about right now and why?
Oh, wow. A challenger brand. It's funny when you talk about challenger brand, it seems to be very, very on trend and very topical in the last couple of years. I think when I first started out at Paddy Power and Everyman Cinema, I think we were challenger brands, but we didn't feel like we were a challenger brand. It was just a bit of a kind of a rebel mindset that we had. So when I look at challenger brands now, I kind of look for brands that are doing things really differently, either in terms of their creative execution or in terms of their kind of the media. Choice of media for me is a really interesting one. And the brand that I'm really keeping an eye on at the moment is a brand called Surreal, which is a protein cereal brand here in the UK. And what I love about Surreal is creatively they do stuff that I haven't seen before. I don't know if you've seen one of their recent campaigns where they actually took celebrities from Michael Johnson Michael Jordan, Dwayne Johnson, Serena Williams, and did quotes from those celebrities, but actually it was, students in Bournemouth or a cleaner in London. And I really like that fresh outtake they've done. And I think the media choices they've done, and I'm sure we're going to come on to it later on, faux out of home or fake out of home is huge at the moment. And we're seeing a lot of brands in that space. And they actually kind of yin when everyone else yanged, and they did a cardboard billboard, which was dubbed the worst billboard ever, which I thought was just really clever. And they actually physically got cardboards and they sellotaped them up onto a billboard. So I think any brand that surprised me, I like, and I think as a challenger brand, Surreal are unconventional and fresh, both in their creative and their media. That's what I really look for at the moment. And we worked with them on a bit of a partnership about 6 months ago, and that was on the back of me seeing what they were doing in the industry, because I really resonated with their brand and their DNA and what they were doing as a business. So if you haven't seen them, really worth a look. Surreal cereal, and it tastes pretty damn good too.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't tried it. I've seen their marketing, because they certainly get talked about, as does Gymbox, within the marketing circles of brands that are doing interesting, creative, clever, to your point, things. And I think we'll come back to it. I don't want to get into it now, but it is interesting because the campaign that they did, and you should go check it out. I think that they ended up, I don't know if they had to take it down, but there was kind of like a legal, discussion around that. And there's something here to that. How far do you push the boundary? Obviously, when we're going to talk about the fake out of home, that's not a legal thing, but it is kind of like pushing the boundaries a little bit. So there's something to that in terms of the brands that get noticed, and kind of, I guess, how they approach really doing things differently, to the point of maybe stepping across a bit of what people would, say is a line as well.
Yeah, and I think, Eric, as well, the bit that I enjoy with brands who try things differently, that they're clever in that they're able to ride that journey. So whether you do get a legal challenge, or again, I'm sure we'll talk about it later on and delve into it, whether you get a legal challenge or whether there's a bit of social chatter, you ride that wave a little bit and you look to see how you amplify your message or your PR on the back of that challenge. And I think even with Surreal, I think it was on the back of that particular campaign that they actually put out a video with their, legal advisor telling them what to do and not to do. So they kind of elongated the campaign, put it that way, on the back of that initial work, which again, I think for challenger brands to be able to kind of work fast and get maximum exposure from a campaign is clever.
Yeah. Love that. All right. So before we get into it, Rory, for people who might not know Gymbox or live outside the UK, can you give us a quick overview on the business?
Sure. So Gymbox is a gym in a box. And we are a London-based brand. We've got nine clubs in London. We're actually in our 20th year. We're celebrating our 20-year anniversary this year. It is mostly known for its really creative classes in the industry. So we do everything what we call from holistic to sadistic. So from yoga to boxing and everything in between. And the brand is quite a disruptive, irreverent, cheeky brand with a very distinctive tone of voice. It isn't like any other gym many listeners may have been to, in that you go in and we have live DJs. It's been designed by nightclub designers. We have, a boxing ring in the middle of the gym. The classes aren't hidden into, cubby holes in different corners of the gym. It's a very in-your-face brand and environment. It was actually founded by a gentleman called Richard Hilton, who worked for an advertising agency back 20 years ago, and he was in New York, and he was working for the likes of Nike, and he saw some fabulous gyms over in New York and brought them back to the UK. There was nothing like this in the UK at the time. And, he was talking about, one day you could have a Muhammad Ali's trainer training you. And then there was that element of surprise. And I think Gymbox has kind of become that, real experience-led brand. It's quite a unique experience, and the marketing kind of really tries to amplify that in terms of what we do in the industry. So it's quite a cool, different gym. Where to look if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, and actually that's what I was thinking as you were talking about. I've actually never been to a Gymbox, so I think I need to change that just to come check it out. But I remember, when I lived in New York, and I don't know if this is where you got the inspiration, but like the David Barton gym and kind of like those types of places. But I think it's interesting because, we had one of our rival roundtables last night, CMO dinner, and a lot of the conversation, or a good chunk of the conversation, and a big takeaway from me was talking about different brands like Ryanair as an example. And I was like, I think it's a great brand. A lot of people would say it's horrible, it's a terrible experience. I think the conversation started because someone was like, they just treat you like shit. But I'm like, they're honest and authentic about what they are. They are, if you want to get from point A to point B for the cheapest, like the least amount of money, and you don't care about anything else, and they're just relentless, maybe to a fault with some of the stuff they've done recently about delivering on that. But I think that, there really is no separation or distinction in the customer's mind between brand and product. And this is where I think a lot of big businesses get it wrong, is like marketing and product, or whatever you want to call it, in a big company ends up getting siloed. And there's that disconnect between what the experience is for the person and what the brand says externally. And I think that's, as you were talking, I'm like, oh, this makes a lot more sense. Like the spontaneity, the diversity, the excitement of the experience in the club. I noticed you didn't call it a gym, the club. Clearly you're delivering on that in the marketing as well, and how the brand comes to life.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting point. The Ryanair example is great because I think ultimately, no matter what you say about Ryanair, people come back again and again and again. They may remember the experience isn't what they would expect, but you get what you pay for a little bit. And I think the social humor in particular, kind of, even to the point where they mock their own customers. People just smile and go, "That's Ryanair, right?" Now that works for Ryanair. I think for our brand, it's very different. We're a premium brand, and wouldn't kind of go down that route. But there needs to be a kind of a brand truth, like what is your product, and how do you talk about your product, and how do you amplify that? And I think our kind of brand DNA, we are a challenger brand. Our classes challenge the industry in terms of, what people would refer to as boring gyms. And we feel like we are the antidote to boring gyms, essentially. And that resonates through our product in the gym. Like we've got really shit hot products in terms of the equipment, but our classes and instructors are second to none. So you do really need to live your brand through your product as well. I think it's so important because our marketing is pretty to the nose. I think it's pretty, it captures your attention, and I think you need to make sure that translates as you walk in through the door.
Great. So let's dive in. Let's talk about the marketing. And the place that I want to start is, you talked about the campaign that you did with Surreal. We're obviously going to talk about the Fake Out of Home campaign. But and there's kind of like a class of brands that I think are able to do, or a class of marketers. You're able to kind of like really punch above your weight in terms of the impact of your marketing compared to the investment, at least the financial investment. I know the creative investment, if we want to call it that, is very high. So I guess every marketer, every brand would want that, and this veers into the conversations that we've all been in where everybody wants to quote unquote go viral. But how do you think about doing more with less? Like, what's the approach to kind of making this almost magic happen on a consistent basis?
You know what? A really good question. If I could articulate that well, I'll be doing really well, and I'd probably be a very rich man. But I think it's born out of necessity to a degree. And what I mean by that is we have very small budgets compared to some of these big brands who are out there. So you've got to work a little smarter, a little bit harder to kind of do that. So I think, firstly, you mentioned creative. We're a very, the Gymbox brand in its DNA is its tone of voice is cheeky, irreverent, and that allows you to do things that are somewhat different in the space. But that tone of voice, it isn't built overnight. You've got to do that consistently for years and years and years. And then that gives you the opportunity to do things somewhat differently. I think where we differ and where we kind of constantly surprise people is through that, particularly through the media and how we use media. Historically, we would have kind of used traditional out-of-home adverts and, local kind of posters and proximity marketing. The world now, through social media and digital, it's tricky because you've got to decide where to spend your money. But we see it as an opportunity to kind of get our audience to almost to get a slightly bigger reach from our marketing. So, we look at taking kind of strategic out-of-home advertising. We actually then think about how do you amplify that on social? How do you kind of get your influencers, your content creators to come down to capture that and to amplify it? But you need a really good creative line or creative hook for people to want to share that. And I think we've always tried to surprise people. So I constantly get messages in my LinkedIn and in my WhatsApp groups where people send me a chalk stencil we've done in the middle of the road or in the park somewhere, and they're kind of going, "Oh wow, Rory, like how did you get away with that?" And my answer always is, we ask for forgiveness, not permission. We just do things, and we've always just said, you know what? Let's just do it. If we get in trouble, we get in trouble, but let's get ourselves out there, get ourselves talked about, because there's nothing worse than being beige and just doing what everybody else is doing. So what we've tried to do with our advertising is to surprise people and for Gymbox to come up in places that they may not expect to see it, and that creates the talkability but it all does hinge back on the creative idea and something that actually works within that media space. And I think that's been the key with people then wanting to talk about Gymbox constantly.
I really like that idea and that provocation of surprise, because actually I can't think of many marketing conversations or briefs that had that word in it or had that goal in it. Breakthrough, viral, disruptive, sure, but surprise I think is a slightly different thing, which is really interesting, and I'm certainly going to take that away and think about it. And also, the legal aspect of this, I know that we touched on it briefly, and you kind of said, let's be provocative. That is something that I think challenger brands and businesses, and a lot of this depends on the CEO and the founder and all that stuff, not just the marketing team, but it is an advantage because if you are at scale, you're more focused on protecting what you have and avoiding risk, particularly for certain industries over others, rather than viewing risk as an opportunity to get more attention and then grow. So I think that that's interesting. But I have a quote down here from our prep call, which I really love, where you said, we focus on creating campaigns and not spending money. And there is something to the constraints drive creativity element of this. But I actually think that, because I think about the fake out of home thing, Pure Gym, I don't know who you would consider a competitor, obviously not the exact same product, but they probably would have just gone and bought, bus ads. But because you didn't have or didn't want to spend the 6-7 figures on the campaign, it kind of forced, or I would assume it forced the team to think a little bit differently about what you actually do. So whether they're real or artificial, those constraints, even just a provocation for the internal team and the agency, I think is a really interesting lever for CMOs to pull.
Yeah, and I think, 2 points came to mind when you mentioned that. I think one is the internal structure. So I think, we do have a very lean team and a great CEO who encourages kind of disruptive thinking and to do things differently. And that does help, because I do think other competitors who are bigger may have more red tape. You may not be able to have an idea in the morning that you want to get out that evening, and that does happen a lot at Gymbox. We're very topical and reactive to events in the industry, but also, touching back on the fake out of home advert we did. Funnily enough, the idea came internally, and we did investigate. Actually, it was around our aerial classes. So we had this idea. I'll talk you through the idea first, and then I'll talk you through the the fallout as such. So it was an idea that came up. We have aerial classes where, you hang from a trapeze or a ring or a hoop. And the idea came about, actually, if you were to, put an advert on a bus, the place you would want to put it is on the roof, because people would then be looking down on it. That was the whole idea. And then again, it goes back to this creative idea. The creative line has to be good. I think then when we investigated the option to do the bus advert, it didn't exist. So we looked at the option and gone, okay, we could lose that creative idea and put it to our creative graveyard, or actually we could, there's a bit of a trend for fake out of home advert, and we thought, you know what, it's such a great idea. Let's kind of mock it up. We'll put it together, and we'll just feed it out there and just see what happens. It was a bit small idea for our social, and we received so much positive PR in terms of being, innovative, slightly different, great use of media space. That was 3 or 4 days of just fantastic PR. And then somebody said, hold on a second, I've seen this image before. It's been used for X or used for Y. And then there was the counter argument from the media outlets in particular saying, hold on, this advert isn't real. That in itself created talkability. And I must admit, I kind of sat back for, a couple of days and just watched, with my popcorn and just watched the chatter on both sides of the argument. And, you've had Maybelline, who did the tube advert in London again. For any of your listeners that may not be in London, it was a great CGI focused ad, which I'm sure people have seen. Adidas and Nike have done some stuff in the back of the World Cup with Messi and CGI, and there's a little bit of a trend for it. Now, ours was not CGI. Ours was made by some great people. We got a great copywriter. We got a great designer. It was a human fake advert as opposed to any sort of CGI. But I think we were happy in our approach that this was a fun, exciting bit of content, and that became content in itself. Whereas if we had done this advert and it wasn't fake, we would not have got half the PR from it. So it cost us probably £250, and we got, I can't even put a number on the amount of exposure we received, and it was phenomenal. Really, really great.
And can I just ask, to the extent that you can share, has that also led to, new signups or whatever the metrics are that you track from a business and commercial perspective as well? Because, I've been in this industry for a long time. I didn't study marketing. I didn't start in marketing. Sometimes I feel like a bit of an outsider, and why I actually really didn't like the advertising agency world, even though I spent 10 years in it, was I felt like a lot of what got talked about was what I would call advertising for the sake of advertising. It was advertising that marketers thought was cool, but didn't actually, or at least nobody focused on, well, what is it actually doing for the business? And so I'm not saying this is that, but I am saying marketers think this campaign is really cool. Is it also driving the business results that you want marketing to do?
It's a really good question, and it's always a difficult one to measure. Look, we can look at how many bits of exposure we've had, what press we've had, but how do you correlate that then into sales, right? I think all we can say on this particular one is we have 8 categories within our business. Aerial being one, combat another, holistic yoga, HIIT, etc. Aerial's always been a tricky one for us to promote, and I think what this did is it put aerial high on our communication for a new audience. And I think actually what we did see was an increased level of bookings on the back of that for a sustained amount of time. Now, can you put that back to the campaign? I'd like to say yes. There are other factors in terms of, what that could have been, but I do believe, and I have seen the bookings go up on it. Now, how much of that would have happened without the campaign? Maybe some. We've been pushing aerial as well, but what this did, it gave it a shot in the arm, and it got us out there, and it got people talking, which was great. And people and the shareability of the campaign as well amongst aerial users was high.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and look, for $250 or whatever it was, it's like, the threshold for what constitutes a positive return is going to be very low. I do want to ask one thing, and this is kind of what came up and stirred some controversy in the AMP group. So there's kind of the, fake out of home And I think people like are getting over that. I think it's really interesting if you're an out of home kind of media agency, but apart from that, that's fine. But, and let me know if I'm getting this right. Did you seed the campaign as something that was real and only then people figured out it was fake? Because I think that's the piece that's a little bit different is that a little bit dishonest if you're saying it's a real thing as opposed to some of the other fake out of home where everybody's just upfront of like, hey, this is fake, but we think it's cool.
Yeah, and you know what? That was the bit that I think riled up, particularly the media owners, and you're in a bit of an echo chamber on LinkedIn, and people are talking to each other, and I do take that challenge on board. I think what we did was exactly that. We put it out there and let people guess: is this real or is this not? There's an element of the media outlets and the media owners. The challenge back to me from these guys, and I love an open conversation. Their view was, you duped us. We kind of shared this, but in the belief that it was real. And I think my response back to that is, look, I get that we're a challenger brand with not a lot of money. We can't compete with Nikes, Maybellines, these guys with huge budgets who can kind of let this seed out into social and let other people share it. We don't have that brand awareness. So we've got to find more strategic, clever ways to get the message out there. Is it a bit of a learning for us going forward on honesty? Perhaps. But I do think the as a challenger brand, you've got to find clever, kind of innovative ways to try and kind of get your message out there. So I think you've got to take some risks. You got to take some risks, and you got to do things a little bit differently.
Got to push the envelope. For sure. You
got it. Look, it's marketing moves fast. This trend is may be here for a while, it may not, and we're learning as we go.
So I want to talk about the internal dynamics and structure that allow you to do all these things. So you talked a little bit about kind of the team that you have within marketing, but I guess around you, right? You said in our prep call that you have a CEO who, quote, lets you get on with it, which I love. And I think any marketer listening is like, how do I get that? How do I get a CEO, a CFO, a board that kind of gives me the autonomy to do interesting, potentially risky, push the envelope types of things? Because I think that's what limits a lot of creativity and opportunity for brands to grow is not necessarily the marketing team not being able to come up with something effective, but the business around them, particularly with incumbents, not allowing it to go out. So how has that worked for you at Gymbox? Like, how have you cultivated that relationship with the CEO? And what does it look like? Do you even have to run stuff past him? Is there an approval process? How does he just let you get on with it?
I hope he doesn't watch this one now when you say it like that, because he'll like, no way. No, I think it's an ongoing process. So I've been at Gymbox, 5 years. The first 6 to 8 months were pretty challenging because, you come in from a brand, I worked for Paddy Power, Everyman Cinema, and I feel like I knew, I know how to run a challenger brand. I know how to do things. I've done marketing for quite a while. You then come in fresh with new ideas, and you almost have to take a step back. You've got to learn from other people. You've got to understand the gym audience is very different than, cinema goers or sport betting. So the first kind of year or so was a bit of a challenge with really getting underneath the skin of the brand. And both our CEO and founder, who's heavily involved in the business still, really love marketing, and the brand has been built on marketing and brands. So they're very hands-on individuals. So that trust takes a long time to build. And you make a few mistakes along the way. There would have been in the early days some work or campaigns that I brought to the guys and pitched that when I look back at it wasn't right for the brand, and it got rightly kind of rejected into the creative graveyard. For every idea we get out, we probably got about 10 to 12 that end up in this kind of creative graveyard. So it takes a long time. I think as you grow as a business, and I have to bring in, you mentioned a team. I've got a small team of 3 full-time people in house, and I've built a number of freelancers and agencies, experts in PPC or paid media, PR agency, a great copywriter who I work freelance with. And I think the CEO then sees the team that you build around you, and he has trust in the output of the work that you're doing week in, week out. I think that's taken a long time to build that trust. But I think to answer your other question around can you just get work done and signed off, it works in two ways. I think either one, I bring them an idea and we sit and we procrastinate over the idea for hours and we think, will the audience buy into this? Is this crazy? Because we have some crazy ideas. And there are some where we sit, we sometimes get out of the office, go to the pub, have a few beers, and we brainstorm ideas. And there are other times where I may have an idea at 9 a.m. and he's unavailable, he may be working, and he'll just trust me to get that out on social because it's taken years and years and years to develop that. Rory gets the brand, he knows our audience, but it's not an easy thing to do. And I think a lot of CMOs and CEOs have different relationships, but I think as a small brand, you have to have trust in somebody who's going to let somebody pull the trigger and live or die from those consequences.
Yeah, I think a couple things that I'd draw out from what you said that really resonate and are interesting to me is one, I used to have a boss who said, you can't sell to somebody who doesn't want to be sold to. Like, you can't change everybody, right? And I think a lot of people listening can probably relate to that in terms of banging their head against a wall to get stuff approved, and it's just not going to happen. But the opposite is also true. Whereas you have CEOs and organizations that are just into this from like who they are and how they're wired and how they think. And I'll say, as an anecdote, the last CMO role that I had before starting Rival, that was a big part of my decision-making process, was spending time with the CEO and seeing how much he was bought into being brand-led and doing disruptive things. And I knew that I would have that partner, like it sounds like you do. So I think that's one. And two, that it takes time. Like you probably didn't walk in day one and were able to do this stuff. Like you've cultivated that relationship over time. And the last thing that I think is really interesting is I really think that even if you have the most numbers, spreadsheet, or engineer, like if you have the least creative marketing CEO out there, I feel like everybody gets a little bit excited about, hey, let's brainstorm this together. Let's go have a beer and talk about what crazy shit we could do. I think there's something to kind of bringing them into the process maybe that, depending on the person, could help with that longer term journey of building the trust and kind of creating that autonomy that everybody wants.
Yeah, and I think, you're right. I think you've hit the nail on the head there with bringing someone on a journey. I think what I've learned over years is if you come to somebody at the end of that journey and pitch them the idea and you've worked it up with your agencies or your freelance team or your marketing team, there's an element where a CEO may say, I'm not sure about that. But if you bring somebody on that journey early, you're going to be tweaking, refining together as you go on, and you get to that end result as a team. I think is how you get things out the door, to put it a better way. But the other piece, as a brand, and we to have that culture throughout the business. So I have it with my CEO, but we have it across the business with my team members. And, I've got to go on holiday occasionally, and it's a lean team and we still have to get stuff out. And I think one of the things we were very keen to do as a team, myself and Mark, my CEO, was to, as we scale the business up, the business is, we don't have brand guidelines, in the way that big companies have brand guidelines. We've got a look and feel and a design, but we wanted kind of internal brand values, what we stand for, and they kind of existed in a weird way, kind of floating around, but we needed to get them down on paper. And what we did as a team was we brought everyone from the business, from the top level to the bottom level. So from the CEO all the way down to the receptionist and even our cleaning teams, and we got everyone around a table over a couple of weeks. And we worked out our brand values, and we came up with 5 brand values, which have essentially steered the business in terms of everything we do, from our marketing to the products we put in and the classes we develop. And I think that has allowed us as I say, to get things out the door quickly, because we know what we stand for, and we have a sounding board for our marketing when we come up with a campaign. Does it hit these brand values? Does it have a giggle? Does it make people smile? Does it sweat the details? Does it, not offend people? Don't be a dick. These are some of our brand values, and that has helped with the decision-making process internally, and it's brought the rest of the team on that journey to be able to kind of make sure we're consistent with our brand and our marketing, but also just from a decision-making point of view, just to get things done quickly. We have that really great sounding board.
So for the last chapter of our conversation, it's actually the one I'm most excited to get your perspective on. I guess the way that I would open it up is I think about this terminology or this dynamic between being idea-led and data-driven. And I think, good marketing teams, good marketing organizations are, of course, a blend of both, right? Is it the creative, or is it the quant? Is it the art? Is it the science? It's both, of course, at the end of the day. But I think most marketers and most organizations tend to be a little bit or a lot bit more one or more the other. You strike me as someone who's maybe a little bit more idea-led, not that I'm sure you go through the numbers and that has a part of your process as well, but one, let me know if that's fair. But I guess the other part of this is like, you've had a lot of wins, interesting stuff. People talk about, like, clearly it's having an impact on growing the business. You mentioned you've had a lot of ideas that you've thrown away as well, but how do you, is it just your instinct? Like, you've done this for a while, you really understand the brand, you really understand the customer and this creative process in your head and the team, like you're just able to feel it and to know what you should do. Like, how do you know what you should be doing with this type of thing? Because often it's not something where you can know for sure that it's going to work.
Yeah, look, I think to answer your first question, I am absolutely more idea-led than data. Look, I look at data. I look at Google Trends and what works for us in terms of search terms. I look at brand surveys we do. We do research with our members. So look, there is data there.
Sure.
I ignore a lot of it.
That's kind of my point, right? It's like, because are there in like alternative universes like 99 other Rory McEntees that just suck at marketing because they ignore the data and they don't have the instinct for it? Like, where does that come from?
You know what? A lot of it comes from, look, first and foremost, yes, I work in marketing, but I'm a Gymbox member. I'm in the gym every day. I'm kind of on the front line, put it that way. I'm seeing what our members see. I'm seeing what, our potential members are seeing from, in the area. So I'm kind of in that world, firstly. So I think that does help. I'm not sitting in my home every day. I'm in the gym 5 days a week. I'm in there in the morning, I'm in there at lunchtime, I'm in there in the evenings. The office is tagged onto the gym. So I'm in there. So that's the first thing. I think, you get a feel from that. I talk to people, not about marketing, but just, did you enjoy that class? Not from a research point of view, but just on a human level. And you get a real good feeling from people on that. But, it's interesting. Like, when you talk about data, we ask, our members questions, and we ask, what do you think about this campaign, these classes? And, I love the Henry Ford quote back in the day. If you ask people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And there's an element to that at Gymbox, and with data, we were, putting, removing treadmills from the gym, and people said, you're mad. People want to run. We know fitness is changing, and we have bands that play in our ring and DJs in our club, and we do member parties, and it's because I'm in London. I see what's going on. People want experiences. People want that social chatter, and even when we run our campaigns, we can do consumer research, but you look at a campaign and you just know that that's going to hit home. That's a home run.
It's the art, right?
Yeah, it's the art. You can put as much science behind it as you want, and you can do consumer research, and you can ask every Tom, Dick, and Harry. But when you're in it and you see work, you go, that's great fucking work. That's gonna land. And you can't explain it. It's just a feeling. It's just a feeling. And there's an element of risk with that, because you're putting it all on your decision. And, will this campaign work? Will it drive the membership and the sales we need it to do? But But so far, I've been lucky. Look, we've had failures. We've done stuff. We've done stuff that hasn't quite landed, and that's been gut feel. We've done classes over the years that people have felt have been greenwashing, or we've done campaigns that have, we never try and be offensive. We want to be disruptive, not offensive. But you can't keep everybody happy, right? You're gonna annoy some people if you are a challenger brand. There's nothing worse than being beige, but if I feel it in my bones and I feel comfortable in that decision, we're going to pull the trigger and we're going to do it.
You mentioned it a bit already with Henry Ford. If you asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. But to put it another way, as you said in our prep call, and I jotted down this quote, the customer is wrong most of the time. I think that is a perfect place to leave it. But before I let you go, I want to do a quick lightning round, just kind of quick fire answers on a few different questions. So what was the first marketing job you ever had?
First marketing job, I used to be on the agency side working for Heineken and their rugby, which was great. Lots of free beer.
Nice. What's the best piece of career advice you've ever received?
Ask for forgiveness, not permission. 100%.
Title of your autobiography. What's the best brand campaign you've seen recently?
Love my friend at Gymshark's work with the modest billboard they've done, the hijab and the influencer stuff. It's just phenomenal. If you haven't seen it, Google it. It's an influencer they've worked with graffiti and a real hijab. It's fantastic.
I have not seen that. So, Kieran, it'd be great if we could pull that up and definitely include it in the show notes. What is a marketing tool you can't live without?
This is going to be really, really boring for a lot of your listeners, but Google Sheets, Google Word docs, I have saved so much time over the years when you just kind of go, are you out of the document yet? And I'm doing a save as file version 23 on a presentation. I just think it saved me so much time.
I remember those days.
Oh.
What is one thing people should do differently after listening to this episode?
Ooh, that's a good question. My advice for anybody who's in marketing, and just do things that you would not normally do. They may scare you, they may not work, 9 out of 10 may fail, but you might just hit on something that is that little kind of golden nugget.
Amazing. Rory, thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a marketing innovation consultancy that helps businesses develop strategies and capabilities to grow faster. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and please do leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.